All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Runners Roundtable podcast. I am joined by Sabrina and Katherine for this episode, and we are going to talk about women in running and safety and feeling empowered as runners in this post-Eliza Fletcher life. So I wanted to start off both of you have been on the podcast before or have had conversations with me before, but just in case someone is new to listening to this episode, if you both can introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit more about your connection to running, where you're at with running right now, and if there's anything we can all celebrate you when it comes to your running right now. So whoever wants to start, go ahead.
All right, my name is Katherine Wuestenfeld. I am a running coach for Team Sugar Runs. I've been coaching with them for the last almost 3.5 years now. I have been a runner since middle school or high school, so a really long time, 15 plus years or so. I am not currently training for anything in particular this season. I'm taking a season mostly to focus on enjoying the process and getting back to my love for the sport again. So I've been doing a lot of speed work and 5K type training, but not with like a really big goal race at the end of it. So just enjoying that right now before hopefully transitioning into some more structure in the spring. That's a little bit more about me and my running. So I'll pass it off to Sabrina.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Sabrina Ehmke. Full-time, I am a high school teacher, though this year I am taking a year off to explore some other opportunities, many within the running community. So I too am a certified running coach. As an athlete, I run with Team Sugar Runs, and my coach is Deborah. Hi, Deborah. But I am exploring some other things within that myself too. I started a run walk club in Skokie, which is just outside of Chicago, called the Skokie Swifters. And that's been extremely successful, and I'm very humbled by that. And I'm also exploring some opportunities working at Fleet Feet in Chicago, also doing some teaching on the side with psychology at a community college. But I've been running for close to 20 years now. Next year, it'll be 20 years since my first marathon. And speaking of marathons, that's what I'm doing right now. I am 10 days out from the Chicago Marathon, which I'm very happy that training is over for the most part. I just want to get to that start line and enjoy it, because it's been a long, hot summer here in Chicago, and today felt super cold and super fast. So I'm ready to go. Thanks for having us, Stephanie.
Of course. So I was drawn to both of you, as I've said, and I praise both of you for how outspoken you were after learning about Eliza Fletcher's murder. And for those of you who don't know, it was on September 2nd. She was abducted while on an early morning run, and later was found to have been murdered by whoever caught her. And the first question I have for both of you is just, what was your initial reaction or response to the news surrounding the story? Because I know for me, there was shock, there was anger, there was sadness, there was just a lot. And so I want to know what your initial reaction to it was. And then I'd like to go a little bit deeper into what we have all kind of seen, the discourse, how it kind of evolved in the days following. So if either of you can share your initial reaction to finding out about what happened in Memphis and then everything that came after.
Yeah, I can start if that's all right. I think, so you said very specifically initially, and as I reflect back, I think one of the initial feelings that jumps out at me is frustration. That might seem a little bit odd to say in the context of somebody, unfortunately, having passed away in this terrible, tragic manner. And I would guess that a lot of people's initial reactions were things like sadness and anger. But I say frustration because it's not the first time. And whatever power you believe in, God forbid that, it could be the last, but it won't be, most likely. And I think that's where the frustration comes from, is that this is something that we can't just let go and ignore, and we do have to keep discussing. There are many issues in this world that are very much like that we have to keep on them, and we shouldn't really have to. But this one in particular, obviously being a woman runner myself, it hits so close to home. And, that's not something that we should have to worry about. There's many other things that we could be worrying about, and to have to think before you go out the door, am I safe enough? Even in my own neighborhood, that is a frustrating thing for me. So I'll leave it there, and Katherine, let you explain your thoughts too.
A lot of what you're saying. I think, we'll talk about, what came back in the few days after, but initially was just pretty upset that it was happening again. We've seen stories of this happen over and over again over the last several years. And obviously it's been going on well before that. It's just, I think the power of social media, we get so much more information now, and we know in real time when something like this happens. So I was pretty upset, and I'd say I was scared to an extent, which we'll talk about a little bit later too. But mostly just really sad, because usually when things like this happen, you don't find the person alive usually. And so I was just really sad because I didn't expect anything good to come out of it.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing. Like I said, I was like, again, here's just another thing to make us be afraid of running. And kind of depending on where you're running, it's like, just another layer. And that question of what does it mean to be safe, and what does it mean to walk out the door and kind of question where you're going, all of a sudden it got amplified. Because I feel like maybe I'll speak for myself, where and I felt this too after Ahmaud Arbery's murder, where I felt like I was in this bubble of running, and then you find out what happened, and all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, but am I really safe running in this neighborhood? Am I really safe being here? Am I really safe being by myself? Or even something as silly as am I safe doing a run walk? Because what if someone sees me walking and they think I'm scoping something out? All of a sudden it started prompting these questions that I hadn't really thought about. And then I kind of just got used. All right, those were my dogs. They wanted to also share a message with everyone. So sorry for that little bit of silence. They were like, hey, what's going on? Okay. Yeah. So if you didn't know I have dogs, I have 2 dogs. They are Schnauzer Poodle mixes, and they are very yappy, and they will listen to everything. So as I was saying before they made their presence known, was that there was that initial shock, and then a heightened awareness of, when I ran, and then just kind of settling into the rhythm of running again. And then this happened, and it's like, oh, wait a minute. Here we are again, this feeling of uncertainty. And I'm sure for both of you, right, being in that position of, wait, but I've been a runner who's ran that early at times. And I thought of that for myself. So it went from being really angry to being sad. And I love that, Sabrina, your initial reaction was frustration, because I got there afterwards. After I started seeing what people were saying, I got so frustrated. And then I also just got jealous. Jealous is probably the right word. I was jealous of all the men out there that could run and didn't have to take the same precautions as me. So can you tell me a little bit about what running looked like for both of you in the days following September 2nd?
Yeah, so I guess it's almost been a month now. I actually live right next to a forest preserve, and so I'm used to mix it into all of my weekly runs, sometimes run in the neighborhood, sometimes run in the forest preserve. I've completely avoided that path for the last month now. The only time I go in there now is with my dog. And it's not that I've ever felt unsafe per se in my own forest preserve here. It's just, my thought was, why take the risk? I have other options of where to run. So while, yes, it's a beautiful place to run, especially when the leaves are changing now, is it worth the risk? And I don't know. I'm sure I'll go back at some point, but that initially, changing my routes, making sure I'm running in the middle of the day, which for me, with the type of job I have the flexibility to run in the middle of the day when it's bright. So that wasn't an issue. Taking out headphones, I think, like I love to run with music. So I don't want that to completely like steal my joy, but for that first week or so after, no headphones in there. I want to be able to hear what's around me. I was very jumpy too. I remember a neighbor pushing like a garbage can down his driveway, and I wasn't paying attention. And all of a sudden he's there waving at me, and I literally jumped back, and I just was terrified. And I'm sure he had no idea why I was so jumpy, but I was just on edge from this. And he meant no harm in any way, but this is just the reality of as women runners right now that we're living in, and having to deal with I don't want to call it PTSD because it didn't happen to me, but it sort of is that way though. It happened to someone like in our community, and by extension, we feel that now in our runs.
Yeah, I hear a lot of what Katherine is saying, and definitely heard that among some of my running friends too, just the initial feeling of like, should I go? Like the question of not, sorry, let me rephrase that. It's more like, sometimes when we are getting up to go for a run, like it's kind of hard to drag ourselves out there sometimes, right? And so the question didn't become about that in those initial days after Eliza's passing. It became more like, should I even go? And for me, I think I had a little bit of an opposite response to that. It was more, I kind of got a sense of defiance. Like, I'm going to go no matter what. Like I shouldn't have to stay at home, or I shouldn't have to feel fear. Although I definitely was a little bit more attentive and on edge. For example, when I go running in the early morning hours, which is what Eliza was doing, and I often do that too. I'm often out the door before the sun has come up. I usually take pepper spray with me, and I've done that for a long time in the early morning hours when it's still dark out. In the days right after, and even still now, I take it with me all the time. And that is not a fear response so much as a preparation response, and a dealing with the reality that unfortunately exists for many women runners. And I've lived in the town that I live in my entire life, basically, and in the specific neighborhood that I live in, going on 10 years. And I've been a runner, at least those last 10 years in this neighborhood. And I have never felt that sense of, as much as I do now, needing to feel a little bit more protection, but of a sense of preparedness. And I think, I mean, we can probably get into this in a little bit later too, but I was thinking of some of the conversations that I had with some of my male runner friends after this. And we can hold off on that till later, but that was another thing that sort of made me step back and think too.
Yeah, I love that I just love the different reactions, because I was like Katherine, where I was pretty scared. And I remember the run that I had on Tuesday morning, and that was a run. And I was like, it's only like, I had to talk myself into it. I was like, it's 4 miles. Like, you're okay. Like, that's like, you're going to be okay. And even then I'm running, and to me, it was just a heightened awareness. Like I'm already so aware. Like I don't run with headphones. I try to be really, really aware of my surroundings. And that run was particularly tough because I was so much more aware. Like if I ran past a car and the lights weren't on, I was trying to remember the driver's license plate. Like there's just so much that I'm like, I came home and I felt like, just like I had survived something, and I was like, wait, this was just a run. Like I shouldn't, the sense of relief of coming home, to me, there was a little bit of anger that that's what I felt. And it was during that run too, that whenever I saw a man running, like no pepper spray, no headlamp, their shirts off, I was like, I would look at them and I'm like, I don't like you right now. I don't like you right now because you have this freedom to run and you're not even, maybe you are, but maybe you're not. And the fact that you have the ability to not think about the things that I'm thinking about, it's really frustrating. So I hear you, Katherine, Sabrina. I'm trying to be like that, like in the days afterwards. That's definitely where I got. I mean, I always ran with my pepper spray as well, but then I went and I bought the Go Guarded ring and I'm like, okay, how can I shift from, and you said it so beautifully, from having that fear response to have a preparation response? Like, how can I reframe this reaction in a way that is empowering for me? Because I want to keep running and I want to keep running outside and I want to keep doing this sport and participating in this sport that I love, knowing that there are some dangers, but how can I be prepared? So I love that you talked about that, of just turning this fear response into one of prepared, and even just thinking of it, it's not just for protection, it's just preparedness. And I think that's like a big leap in terms of feeling empowered on the run again. So what were the conversations that you had with people afterwards? And so it's a two-parter question, is what were some of the conversations you were having with people afterwards? And what was problematic about the greater dialogue that was happening afterwards? I know both of you, again, it's watching both of you on social media, I was just like snapping my fingers, clapping at home, because I'm like, yes, why is, and I'll start, right? Like, why are we focusing so much on her running at 4:30 in the morning by herself? Right? Like that was like a big thing. So I'm just curious, in your communities and with the people that you talk to, what came up? Because I'll tell you, for me, my husband was worried about talking to me about it. Like he didn't know how to talk to me about it. And part of my thinking process was, that's part of the problem though. You don't know how to talk to me and I'm your wife and you're a man, like what's going on there? What's going on that you can't talk to me? And also just, are men talking about this? So I'm curious, within your respective communities, what have the conversations been like? And again, what was your response / reaction to the greater dialogue that was out there post Eliza Fletcher's murder?
So I'd like to answer those questions in an opposite way, just because I think sort of the general, I don't want to say like societal response, but like the general, let's just say the Instagram response at least, or the Facebook response, the general social media response kind of leads into some of the conversations that I had with just running friends in general, family in general, but also specifically with my male running friends. So I think on the general level of response, I'm going to use a word here that might be triggering for some people, but just dealing with like rape culture or like sexual assault culture, the idea about blaming the victim, right? And all of those questions, like, well, why was she going out at that time? Why is she wearing a tank top? Why is she wearing tight shorts? Why is she running far from home? Why isn't she doing, and just all of those questions, but never asking about the attacker or about the perpetrator, right? What they're doing or what they're not doing, or why are we not teaching people to not attack other people? I mean, it seems so basic, but why are those the questions that come up first, right? So there's a lot more within that, I think, but that leads into some of the conversations I had specifically with some male running friends about their identification of not having to worry about those things. And like you were specifically talking about, Stephanie, they don't have to worry that they don't have pepper spray with them. And to be fair, if we want to talk about identities other than being a female runner, certainly I will admit that there are other identities that have to worry about those things too, right? first person to say that. However, if we're focusing on the impact of being a female runner, that's not something that men generally have to worry about. And it made me feel very good that my male running friends were the ones to just admit that straight out. Many of them made their own posts following the attack about this very specific thing. And it made me feel supported in a way that I knew that they were supportive, but on a larger scale, it made me feel very good that they recognize that this is such an issue that they don't necessarily have to think about.
Interesting that your male friends, you felt so supported by them, because my reaction was opposite in that I didn't see any men talking about it. And I think part of it is because they don't know how to approach the conversation. And so I totally admit that. And I think that's part of it, but I think we need to work on that as a community, like a running community of, they have just as much responsibility in this as we do. And so people like your friends, that's awesome that they're doing that. And it's getting that conversation started and saying, I see you and I support you. I don't understand what you're going through, but like, I'm going to speak out about it. Because that's something I didn't see personally in my circles. Sometimes people reached out via direct messenger or something, but all of the content created for the public seemed to be all from women and from that perspective. But I think to answer then your other question of other things that we did see, so beyond this who was posting, it was really upsetting that people were victim blaming and wanting to nitpick every little thing, even in the midst of them trying to find her. It wasn't let's focus on this family and what they're going through. We're gonna just blame her and completely forget that this perpetrator is the one at fault here for being out just looking for someone. And that made me really mad, because I have a lot of athletes that I work with who have to run really early, like their moms, or they work in hospitals and they have weird hours, and maybe they run late at night. And that's the only time that they can get out to run. And then seeing people saying, well, they should just run on treadmills. If you had to run on a treadmill all 7 days a week, would you actually love running? Maybe, but probably not. And so that just made me really upset that it's instead of fixing the root issue, that it's unsafe for women to go out and run, let's just take all the joy out of it and tell women they can't do X, Y, and Z. So yeah, I'm obviously my voice is getting, angry here, because I was very passionate about this, very upset about it. I was just mad. And other people, and my mom told me that she was always worried when my sister and I go out for runs, and that made me really sad, because up until this point, I didn't know that. I didn't know that she was scared that I'm doing this 6 or 7 days a week, and I had no idea that she's living in fear for me and my sister. And obviously you want to change that, but it was just sad, coming out of things that people are saying, and she meant it from a good place, but she wasn't blaming anyone, but just bringing up facts of how she feels as her daughters are runners.
I just want to amplify something that Katherine just addressed too, with regards to the treadmill, go run on a treadmill. That is the perfect example of, we as women runners should have to fix something to accommodate men. And that that's the perfect example of that. I think there's nothing else to say about that. That is the epitome of a patriarchal structure just coming out in a very, particular area, the running community. But just by fact of saying that, that's identifying that there's something that we should have to do as women to appease or accommodate males.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
Yeah. I think it was interesting too that even women were fighting with each other over this.
Mm-hmm.
I had people comment on posts that I made. They're women telling me that you can't be so naive. you like, yeah, that's great that like you're saying all this, but like it doesn't make it any more safe. And I'm like, yeah, but like the point, that's the whole point, is that like I get that like in this current state, it's maybe there are things that are making it not safe, but like, why can't we focus on fixing these things? And I don't live in this rosy world where I think that there's gonna be no bad people ever, but there are things in dialogue that we can start having to change some of this culture, like even starting as basic as like, stop whistling at women who run. Like it starts like at that level, because it only escalates from there. Because if you treat a woman like that when she's just out running and you think that that's socially acceptable, then men kind of move up the ladder of like, okay, well, what else is socially acceptable? Like, okay, and not every man is this way, but it makes it more socially acceptable to treat women as inferior and for like, well, that they're only important for their bodies, when we're accepting this kind of culture. So that made me pretty upset too, just the arguments that I was having with women. And honestly, I had to stop, because like I can't like I can't just argue with, I'm not going to change everyone's mind, but I can put out what I believe in and try to start the conversation. But yeah, the attacks were interesting from people that I thought were, in my circle too, of being female runners.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, because that was something that I noticed too, where I'm like, ugh, here we are again with like the victim blaming, right? Like that's just so easy to blame her. And once again, I'm like, Katherine, I had a very similar reaction where I think I saw maybe one male post on social media, at least that came across my feed, posting about like, must have been a reel or a video or something like that, where he was like, oh, I went out for a run and I didn't have to think about any of this. And I was like, oh, that's the only voice I've heard. Every other voice, at least, I don't know, however the algorithm works, right? Like it was just female after female after female after female after female. And even for me, I had to seek out conversations with men. And it was just one of those things. And that was kind of shocking for me too, because I'm like, wait, I have to seek out, like I have to be the one to initiate these conversations. And then I also have to be one of the people, or I have to be the one to be like, to challenge why is that? And Sabrina, again, you put it so beautifully of like, why is it that I have to accommodate to men? And again, my husband, he had told me, oh, I was afraid to talk to you about it. I do get worried about you when you run. And on the one hand, I appreciate that he gets worried. On the other hand, again, it upsets me that he even has to worry, that he's got to worry about it. And I remember having a discussion with someone else, and the response was, oh yeah, but why was she out at 4:30? And I had to say, I've been the person who's been out at 4:30. There was definitely a period of time in my training where my long runs happened on Friday, and I would start them at 4:30 in the morning. And I ran loops around my neighborhood, but it was still, I'm like, wait, I've been that person. And there are definitely days now where I am that person, even if I'm starting to run at 5:30 or I'm starting to run at 6. I can't remember which one of you had shared it, but there was even this post that went up that was, oh, this person, you can't say it's the early morning run when this person was attacked in the afternoon. This person was attacked in the evening. This person was attacked at 11 something in the morning. And I think there was even a story recently, I believe it was maybe on Monday, there was a woman that was running in New York, and it was 11:25 in the morning when she was attacked. So it's like, make it make sense. Like if you're going to tell me don't run at that time, then tell me what time can I run at? So that was kind of upsetting, where it was just, oh, you should change what you're doing to stay safe. And again, that question of, well, what are we talking about as a whole? Like who else is having these conversations? Because why is it that it's just us women having these conversations, and it doesn't, not just us women, because Sabrina is telling us in her community it's been a little bit different, but it's, where is this conversation rippling out so that more people are talking about it or more people are aware of it? Listen, I it's okay. My pepper spray and the Go Guarded ring, it's fine. Like I wear them. It's not adding weight to me. It's not something that I'm aware of, but it's why do I have to keep adding to my body in order to be safe when I go run? And that was just kind of my question. It's like, why do I need another thing? Or even something as silly as a reflective vest. You know what my thoughts were in the days after is, oh, I should wear a reflective vest because it's safe, but I don't want to wear a reflective vest because I don't want people to see me if they intend to do harm, right? Like there's this tug within of, okay, how safe can I be and how protected can I be? But then how much more attention am I going to draw to myself that maybe I don't want? But it goes back to what you all were saying of, why is it on us and why are we not talking about the people who do harm? Why are we not talking about, and that's the greater discussion of what resources do we need as a country in order to address these things, whether it's mental health, whether it's in the aftermath of this, finding out that that perpetrator had done something to someone else a few years ago, right? Like where are the faults in the system that need to be addressed? Because what we're talking about within running is just, it's a piece. It's like a microcosm, or, it's like just a small piece of something that's reflective of a greater issue. So I hear what both of you are saying, and it's so funny how it's like, it's been a month and yet the feelings are still there. Like that anger is such an easy thing to kind of tap into. So my question is, how have you reframed that for yourselves, or how have you connected to a sense of, I guess, empowerment and hope as a runner, and as people who I consider leaders in this sport? How are you continuing the dialogue?
That's a big one. I think when I went out, so I went out this morning and I left my house at like just before 6, I think. And, so the sun wasn't up yet. And I did that purposefully, right? Like I wanted to, it's like 3 miles direct from my house down to the lakefront. And so I did that purposely because I like to go on a sunrise run once in a while. And to be honest, I don't think I was really thinking about it too much as I was leaving. I just sort of grabbed the pepper spray, put it in my pocket, got my little water bottle, got my goo, and I was out the door. But every so often as I was running, and I had my headphones with me, I have aftershocks, so they're not in my ear, but I keep them off specifically until it's daylight, which I don't know if that's just a mental, comfort for me, but certainly it keeps me paying attention more than when it's dark out than when it's not. But I did check in every once in a while with myself, maybe more than I would normally, just to make sure, like, is my pepper spray easily accessible? And it wasn't when somebody drove by, it wasn't when there was an occasional other runner or somebody out walking. It was purely just every so often, I just checked to make sure it was there. And I think that's an unfortunate reality that I will just continue. And I guess to your larger question of like continuing the conversation, I think it's a matter of making sure that within our immediate running communities, we're addressing that, and we're making it a point to say, this is what I'm doing to stay safe and to stay conscious, not because, and certainly that's an okay reason to be in fear too, right? But I'm not doing those things because I'm afraid all the time. I'm doing them, like I said before, to be prepared. And certainly having that fear is natural within that, but I think it's having common sense also. We unfortunately live in a world that is not going to change tomorrow, and men are not going to suddenly stop whistling at us as we're running, no matter what I'm wearing, I could be wearing 10 layers of winter clothing on a -20-degree day in Chicago, and I would still get it, right? It has nothing to do with that. So it's more for me a consciousness of, you have to be reasonable, you have to be smart when you run, and you can continue to have these conversations, which is very important, but it is also important that other people, like men, have those conversations also.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you're saying. I think one thing that so last year I took a self-defense class with my sister. One of my mom's friends is like a black belt and was willing to teach us, which is awesome. So we did that, and that really, I told her after that, I was like, you gave me my power back, because I feel like now I can fight back versus just like crumpling in that moment and not knowing what to do. And so one of the things that I'm working on right now is putting together a free class for people in my area, runners, to come do that, because that is,
I'm gonna come.
and specifically females, because I want people to feel comfortable, and I want you to gain that power back, because and it's something you have to keep practicing. Like you can't do it. Like I was thinking about it this recently, obviously, because this came up, and I saw a video online of someone showing, like, instead of when someone grabs you, like pulling back, like slam their arms down because you use the force of gravity to your advantage. Like, okay, I completely forgot about that, like, because I haven't been practicing it. And so that's one thing that I'm gonna make like pretty standard, I think, in my own routine, is like every year refresh and just practice. And hopefully I never have to use it. And hopefully it's just something that is just there, but it makes me feel like I have control again of the situation. So that's one thing I would add to this, is how to feel empowered. Maybe take a self-defense class and find one in your area, and find someone who's willing to teach you.
Katherine, I think we should partner together to have a Team Sugar Runs Skokie Swifter self-defense class.
Yes. So yes, I will reach out to you about it. But yes, I have a space. I have the woman who taught us is willing to do it for free. So we're gonna set it up for anyone who wants to come out in the Chicago area.
Awesome.
Yeah, Chicago area.
Sorry, Stephanie. Little collaboration happening within collaboration here.
I love it. I'm all about collaborating. I'm like, yes, I'm like, can I fly up for this? I mean, I can't, but I love that, because that was going to be one of my questions, is how do we empower women in particular? And thank you, Sabrina, for highlighting there are a lot of other marginalized people that do not feel safe run. Our discussion is focusing on women, as coming from our perspective as women, but we do acknowledge that there are definitely a lot of other people who don't feel safe running either. So thank you for highlighting that at the beginning, or towards the beginning of this conversation. But yeah, my question was going to be on how do we empower women? And it's funny that we're all kind of having this similar thought process, where I was thinking, I'm like, how can I bring that to my community? And how can I always speak in we, because I'm so used to like mom brain, I'm speaking as in everybody, but like, how can I make that a free and accessible resource? Because I think that's part of it too. It's where something like self-defense, and Katherine, you mentioned it, and it's so true. Like, that's a skill that you have to keep working on it. It's not a one and done thing. You actually have to keep working on it to keep those skills fresh. And that was something that I thought about. I'm like, oh, that would be great if we could have that here. Because I had read something recently that, it talked about, your pepper spray or different things, where it's great if you have that. But if you don't know how to use them, or if you choke in that moment, then is it really going to do what it needs to do? And that highlighted something for me, that I was like, oh, so yes, I feel comfortable, like carrying the pepper spray in my hand makes me feel comfortable. But in a time of, if something were to happen, is my brain going to be able to keep up fast enough for me to do what I need to do in order to stay safe? And that's where these self-defense classes, it's that instinct. And I think there's also Sabrina, you had mentioned something about society and not changing. And this was one of the discussions I had with someone in terms of how difficult it is to trust our instincts when we're running or when we're out in the world in general, right? Like there are times where I've been on a run and I'm like, something doesn't feel right. And in that moment, I have to decide, do I trust my instinct or do I act brave and continue ahead, right? And I always trust my instincts, but I think that's part of it too, where when we're running or when just, again, in general, out in the world, are we trusting that instinct or are we thinking, no, I've got to be brave. I just need to keep on moving ahead and like not let these things get to me. So even in those moments, I don't know why I'm sharing that, but that's just like part of my thought process too, when I'm running of, am I being reasonable with what I'm feeling or am I overreacting? And I think that's where this spectrum of trusting my instinct and being brave kind of comes up for me. And beyond, I guess what I'm trying to ask now is beyond something like self-defense, how else do we empower women to run? Because I think running is just, it's hard and it's challenging, but I think it's just the most amazing sport on the planet. I really think it's just, it gives so much. I'm constantly trying to get people to run. And if not running, then okay, go watch people who run and that's going to inspire you to want to run. Like I'm so in love with this sport that my question is always, how do we make the sport more inclusive? But now it's that layer of how are we making it more inclusive, but then how are we also helping people to feel safe and to be empowered? And I just love the idea of transitioning the language from, instead of being safe, how are we helping people feel prepared for whatever they may encounter on their run? So as people who work with other runners, run clubs, how are we supposed to do that? Or how can we do that? Because if self-defense isn't something that's accessible to everyone, or, you know, even if you two get together and plan a self-defense class, maybe it's a month from now. How do we get that person to run tomorrow? How do we get that person to run next week? What is that dialogue or conversation, or what are the selling points so that people can feel comfortable going out on the run right now?
Wasn't it the great Katherine Switzer who said, if you're losing faith in humanity, go watch a marathon? I mean, you just use talking about, you know, just the act of watching it, you know, can really be inspiring, especially if you're watching a full marathon, just to see people, especially if you're at like mile 18 and you're watching those people. One thing that immediately came to mind for me was, obviously the access of it is extremely important, but also making people feel that they are capable. And in creating the Skokie Swifters, one of the most important things for me was that the name was not Run Club, it was Run Walk Club. And that has been, I think, so helpful for so many of our members. So many of them have moved from being walkers into being runners. So many of them ran their first 5K this summer. And we still have a ton of walkers who are remaining walkers, and everybody accepts everybody there. And so I say that to say that there are places where I think we can just make running more accessible. And then within that, that I think automatically provides the community that is necessary to feel safe. So we have our runners and our walkers who are active at the same time twice a week at our 2 club meetups that we have, among all the other events and races that we do. And they know for sure that there's going to be at least one other person that is either running or walking at their pace. And that alone, I hope, I mean, at least for me, knowing that someone's at my pace makes me that much more excited to go out for a run. And if you can provide that kind of access, I think that alone gives that feeling of safety, knowing that they won't be alone out there.
It's like a buddy system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I'm like, it's like a buddy system. And I think I agree with you on that. And that's why I'm such a proponent of whenever I do anything, it's like, no, we have to have a walking group. Like there has to be a walking group. And you don't know what doors you're opening up for someone by making that space available. And I saw that with one of my friends that she came out, her and I walked, and like a week later, she went for her first run and she shared with me, she's like, I think I went running because of the walk. And I was like, that's exactly
awesome
why I'm doing this, or that's exactly why I always push. You got to have that walk group, because it's just, like you said, there's that accessibility, but I also really love that idea of how you connected the dots of make running more accessible so then you can create the community to feel safe. And from there, a lot can bloom. Any thoughts, Katherine?
You were one of the people who came to mind, Sabrina, just because you formed this run club. Because I think running clubs, run walk clubs can have such a huge impact because it gets people to feel a sense of community if they're first starting out, or even if they have been running for a while and maybe this kind of news shocked them and scared them. Being with a group, there's power in like being with a group too and feeling more comfortable. So I think if people are struggling, maybe seeking out running clubs in your area might be an option, or connecting with other friends that you know in the area who run, just reaching out to people. And I think also the conversation of empowering people comes down to like making sure there's inclusivity of paces, which you talked about, and no one runner just because their pace is faster is any better of a runner than someone whose pace might be like run walk and they're starting out, or they just love run walk and that's what they want to stick with. That's totally fine. And so I think continuing that type of conversation online, and I know when I talk to my athletes, I actually had a conversation with someone yesterday because I told her like, oh, when I work with my athletes, and she stopped me and she's like, I just want to stop you right there because I'm not an athlete. And I was like, well, I think we can change that, because I call everyone who I work with an athlete, because you are participating in the sport, you're working on bettering yourself. Like there's a difference between an elite athlete and all of the rest of us who are recreational athletes, but we're still athletes. And so just making sure the conversation around what we call ourselves, runners, athletes, whatever you want to call yourself, continuing to make sure people feel seen in that space. And so it's great, hearing about, the work that you do in your group and other groups around the country too, trying to get people involved, and in every aspect, whether that be, a race or religion or gender, just making sure people feel seen and wanted to be included in their groups too.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, and thank you for all of that, Katherine, the three of us are all part of Team Sugar Runs. And I think that's another great example of a community that it doesn't matter how quickly you think you're going to run a race or how easy you're going to take it or whatever, you belong there. And I know we talk about that, like and Stephanie, you had a whole entire podcast about this, the idea of belonging. And if you run, you're a runner. And I, as my psychological brain is working here, as a psych teacher, I'm guessing that maybe there's some sort of correlation between people who are being very critical of women runners and the times and the things that they wear, and people who don't believe you're a runner unless you can run a sub 3:30 marathon. I'm just going to guess that that's a correlation, but certainly that's not the only one. But my point is just that within the running community, there are, of course, going to be outliers that are going to continue to be critical and are going to continue to judge. But the more that we can have groups like My Swifters and Team Sugar Runs and Stephanie, I'm blanking on your Miami female running group right now. What is the name of it again? I apologize.
She runs this town. Thank you
She
for
runs
remembering.
this town.
We're still building it, but we're there.
But I think the three of us all have genuine examples of what could be more and more within the running community to not only make us feel like we belong and to make us feel like we have community, but ultimately to make us feel like we're safe.
As always, I love that connection between belonging, community, and safety, all layered with this idea of feeling seen. Because that's just such a big part of it of, do I feel like I belong in this space? Am I represented in this space? And I love always the suggestion. And I feel like Katherine, I feel like this has come up with all of us where it's like, oh, are you having trouble? Go seek out a group. Like go to a run club, and it's funny because I always say run club, but that comes out of laziness because I don't want to say like run, walk. And even then it's like, oh, but it's that little bit of languaging. Once we change that, taking the time to just say walk a second more can change a person's experience of their sense of belonging there. So our languaging is so important with all of this too. But again, it always makes me laugh when and I remember Deborah said the same thing where she's like, go volunteer at a race. Like that was her thing. Like go, like, don't just watch, but like volunteer at it. And I think this highlights how running is more than just running and feeling like a runner. And we've talked about this, feeling like a runner is more than just, going out the door and or on your treadmill or wherever it is and doing that physical act of running. So I appreciate you all sharing that. And I love that we're all in different places and yet kind of coming together with similar thoughts. So my final question for both of you is, in general, how can we be better advocates for women in running? That's a big one.
About like us as individuals or like everyone, like men.
I
women.
say us three right here, right now,
Okay.
because I feel like in the aftermath of Eliza Fletcher's death, I was like, society needs to change and all of this, and this is all messed up, and why aren't we having these conversations? And I feel like when I get caught up in that collective, I lose sight of the power that I do have. And it starts with me. It's, or not so much that it starts with me, but that's where I start to feel a sense of control or that sense of empowerment of, wait, I can be the one that's starting to seek out these conversations. I can be the one that's bringing this stuff out. So the question is more us, because I really do believe that us having this conversation here, it's going to ripple to other places, right? Or even me having a conversation with someone who maybe they never thought to think about this or didn't think it was their place to have an opinion. I don't know. So my question is more to us. It's how are, to us or right now to you, how and what, where, however you want to answer that, just how can we be better advocates for women in running in all ways?
Well, I think you kind of touched on it, is that it starts with us. So just simply being out there running and having other people see you out there as a woman runner, you're probably inspiring a lot more people than you realize. And maybe they'll tell you, maybe they won't, but just seeing it goes back to like if you want to be something, you have to see it too. You have to see it being done and see people like you in that space. So by simply going out and running as a female runner, you're giving that power back to other women to see, I can do this. I belong out here. She's doing it. I can do it too. And making sure that your friends feel that same way too, and encouraging them with whether that's their goals that they're chasing after, and making sure that they feel appreciated and seen, and that their goals are just as important as your own, sharing that with them. But I would say like the being seen, I think that's something we've talked about in a lot of different spaces lately, with regards to running and inclusivity. But it does go down to that like basic of a level. If you see it happening, like you see someone who looks like you out there running, whether it's the body type that they have, or the pace that they have, or the type of clothes that they're wearing, like you will feel like you can be out there. So just my advice to women runners is just get out there and make yourself known, and as much as you're comfortable with, and people will, you'd be surprised how many people are finding inspiration from just seeing you get out on your daily routine and being consistent and getting out there.
I agree with what Katherine said. And to add to it, I would say the exploration or the sharing of feelings that you have regarding running, especially in the wake of Eliza's passing. The fact that you both shared today that being fearful was one of your initial responses, and mine was frustration. That opens up a lot, I think, for a lot of runners, and particularly women runners, just knowing that other people feel the same way that they do. And I think sometimes running can feel very lonely, especially if you don't have those communities or don't have your running buddy who you meet, 2 or 3 times a week. And you might find yourself often wondering, well, I'm feeling very scared to go running right now. Am I the only one? And certainly I've been there. And I think just the pure fact of hearing other people talk about it gives power, right? Putting words have power, and putting those words out there and recognizing that other people are feeling the same way, that can be very motivating for someone. And in a similar fashion, I think another very important way that we can be advocates for women runners is to encourage our male running friends to have those same conversations. I will certainly be sending this podcast to all of my male running friends after we're finished with it, and encouraging them to share it with their male running friends. Just having that continual conversation about what women are actually feeling allows them to feel a little bit more understanding. They may not fully understand, but they'll at least have an idea of what is really going on for many women when we go out the door. And that's incredibly important to continue this support for women runners in general.
And even beyond that, I'm thinking, my husband subscribes, hi husband, to this podcast. And I'm thinking of even beyond that, right? Like encourage the male runners to listen, but then have them encourage their friends to listen, right? Because the 3 of us have husbands who don't run, and yet running is such a big part of our lives. So they're indirectly a part of the running community too. So and I mean, we touched upon it briefly earlier, where it's like, this is part of a bigger issue. And it's just one issue that's tied to so many other issues. And so I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, who else can listen to this? And who else? And, and I always tell people, it's like, and even just hearing what you're saying, where every run feels like an act of courage. And for me, I am tired of feeling afraid. And that was kind of my sentiment. Immediately there was that fear, and then there was that anger. And even now, like I feel, and it's always said with great intentions, but when someone tells me to be safe out there, that actually, like, it really bothers me. Because, and again, I know the intention is great, that, and there is a good meaning behind it, but the impact of a statement like stay safe is that I feel the burden of being safe, right? I feel like I'm the one that has to be responsible for staying safe, for making it home alive, or making it home untouched, right? So there's just so much more to this conversation. And I think there's, like, I counted maybe 4 things that were suggested, right? It's like the go out there and run. And now I'm like, oh, can I post a running post on social media so people can see that I'm still running? Because that was one of the things my response was, I got off of Strava. And that was just my response, especially after I read some stories, that I was like, you know what? Again, it goes back, Sabrina or Katherine, Katherine, you had said, like, why take the risk? And for me, that's what Strava was. Strava was a risk that I was like, why am I taking that risk of maybe my route showing up, or maybe people seeing that I run the same? Why take that risk? So I got off there, and someone reached out to me and asked if I was scared to run. And I was like, oh, that question probably comes because I haven't been posting on social media about it, because my runs aren't on Strava. Like, all of a sudden, someone who was running, it doesn't seem like she is running. And it's like, wait, I wasn't. So even seeing that, like, that's something that I'm feeling inspired by, of okay, wait, if I want to be an advocate for women in running, I need to make sure that people know that I am still running, that I am out there, that I am still lacing up. And most of the time I'm doing it by myself, but sometimes I'm doing it with others. So I love that there's this go out there and be seen. And I think part of that being seen is also be willing to share about that. So not just share your feelings, but share that, yeah, I am still out here and I am still doing this in spite or despite the fear. Uplifting friends. Katherine, I love that, because I'm like, wait, that's what I love to do. I love to cheer people on and be like, yes, you got this. Like, go for it. Like, and I think we do need that. I think we need to be cheerleaders just as much as we are the person that's doing the running. And that is how the community grows. When you know that oh, wait, that person over there is going to be in your corner. Absolutely. The sharing the feelings is huge. And I think that goes beyond just sharing the fear. It's sharing the joys too, and sharing how from this conversation, I'm like, oh, we've all overcome something. And there is an element of overcoming, whether it's that frustration or whether it is that fear. It's overcoming that to continue to find joy in the process, and to continue to find the desire to share something like running with others. And then again, encouraging everyone. I'm like, husband, you got to listen. Because that was one of my thoughts, where it's like, are men talking about this? Even men who aren't runners, just are men having this discussion at all? Because it can't just be me screaming at the top of my lungs that this isn't fair, because then the response is, well, life isn't fair. I understand life isn't fair, but if we're not talking about how unfair it is, then it's going to stay the same. And we're all supposed to just suck it up. So thank you. Do y'all have any final thoughts, any final tidbits to share?
The other thing from what you were talking about of sharing like your Strava runs, like just remembering that, like, even like on social media, it can be easy to get caught up in how many followers someone has, or is this actually reaching anyone? And my thought on it, like, is always, if I can just inspire one person, then I think the post did its job. So it doesn't matter if you feel like your reach is 100,000 people or 2. Like, it's still important to share your voice, and someone out there is listening and is going to take what you're saying to heart.
I'll echo that too, Katherine. I think it's huge credit should be given to you, Stephanie, for creating the spaces for discussing these topics within running. I mean, there's a lot of running podcasts out there, but the way that you provide that open space to do it is very important. And specifically, the topics you've been discussing have been incredibly valuable, I think, to many of the people within each of our running communities. So please keep providing those spaces. And that's just another piece of what Katherine just mentioned about your voice is important. And so thank you for doing that.
Thank you for being here. And thank you, truly. I feel like we've had some, both in this podcast realm and on social media, some great conversations. And I just want to thank you both for always being so open to having these conversations with me. There are definitely, and I guess it's, I want to say that, Katherine, what you said was really validating, because I feel like, and Sabrina too, where it's like, oftentimes I feel like I'm having these conversations and I'm like, but does anybody care? Does anybody like want to hear about, does anybody want to hear three women talk about how they were fearful and frustrated and angry? And it's like, we want to hear that. Like, for me, it's also this reminder of, wait, but if I heard that you were frustrated, you just opened up a whole different world of experience for me that I didn't know existed, right? Because if I don't talk to anybody, I'm going to think everyone's just sad and afraid like I am. Talking to you, I'm like, oh, wait, she was frustrated. And wait, there was an element of that for me too. And all of a sudden, this very lonely experience, it's not so lonely anymore. And talk about community and safety. All of a sudden now, here's another pocket of community that I have with the two of you, where we can talk about these very difficult topics and find a sense of safety in that, at least a sense of safety in that there's another person here who wants to hear what I have to say and who is ready to receive it. Because that's also part of it, of can I speak these words and have them be received in a compassionate way? So thank you too for being here and sharing all your thoughts. And I'm just so grateful to Team Sugar Runs for bringing us together. And I am, as always, excited to continue following you both, cheering you on in all that you do, and truly just so incredibly grateful that both of you are such advocates for this sport, and that neither of you really holds back with the injustices that you see. And as I always say, it's we can be a part of this running community and still want it to be better. Having these discussions doesn't mean that we don't want to be a part of it or that we think something's wrong. It's that, wait, we love this sport so much, we know that it can be better. And we know that our lives outside of the run have a great impact of us on the run. And how we feel on the run impacts our outside lives. So truly just thank you for being here and for being open to having this discussion. And I hope that those little advocate suggestions and facts, that we all take that with us and let that inspire us through the weekend, through the week, through the month, through crossing that Chicago Marathon finish line, through whatever it is that we're doing, because running is incredible. And the fact that running has the three of us, I'm just going to celebrate running for being able to pull us in. And I thank you both so much for being with me today and giving me some of your time.
Thank you for including us.
Thanks for having us, Stephanie.